Okay, we're live. Hey, Chrissy.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here and chat with you.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Where are you based? You just told me you're on the beach, but where are you normally?
I'm normally in Brooklyn.
Oh, okay. I think that there are lots of folks here, like Brooklyn, New York. So let us know if you're tuning in live. Where are you tuning in from? If there are any Brooklyn folks here, kind of New York City. Thank you for being here. Chrissy, as some of you already know, I included that in an intro, is a writer and a coach and fitness and strength coach and many, many more things. Awesome. So Chrissy, give us a little bit of the origin story, like the hero story. What are the life choices that you've made that led you to this video call, to this call today?
Absolutely, I'll give you the abbreviated version. But I went to college. I actually went to school. I double majored in social welfare and justice and sociology. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna go to law school. I've always been really passionate about social justice issues. So I was gonna go to law school and like do all this stuff. So I thought. And when I finished school, I actually was like, well, I just want to work for a year. I started working for the federal government, and then 10 years later, I was still working in the federal government. So I worked with homeless veterans for like the first 5 years there, and then I got into like management positions. So the second half, I was like an upper management position. During that time, working in this job, I like along the way, I wanted to like start working out. I was drawn to fitness, I think, for reasons that a lot of people are. I was just like, I want to be skinny. I need to lose weight, and so I went to the gym, hired a trainer, and I was like, I have one goal, make me skinny. I could care less about anything else, right? And she's like, okay, cool, let's go to the weight section. And I was like, pause. I said I wanted to get skinny. What are we doing lifting weights, right? Like I just didn't understand anything about fitness and exercise. And she was like, okay, well, just trust me, right? You like give it a few sessions. Like she tried to explain to me why this would be helpful. And I was like, whatever. But I had hired her. So we started strength training and not anything, just like, body weight stuff and using dumbbells. And I remember my first session was only 30 minutes and it literally felt like I got hit by a train afterwards. I was just like, I was not used to using my body in that way. And I was like, this is miserable. But I had signed up for like a lot of sessions. I had like paid for it already. So I kept going back. And then like what would happen is like after 2 months, I was like, oh, actually like I can see how the things that were like really, really hard the first session are starting to get a little bit easier. And I'm like, okay.
Hold on. I have so many questions.
Yeah, okay.
So first of all, you said like the biggest draw to exercise for you in the beginning was very much like you wanted to be skinny.
That was it. I had no other reason.
We hear that, I think, a lot, maybe less so. Are you noticing a shift like in the last 5-10 years? Like, is there a shift?
I mean, I think people, I think so. And I think I work with primarily women. And so I think what I see happening with women more is that I think at least in mainstream fitness and wellness industries, we're starting to see more women like doing heavy lifting and like competing. And I think there's more conversation from women about the benefits of strength. And I think there's more of us talking about while like being skinny might have been the reason we came to the gym, then we start talking about like how strength has been transformative in our lives for reasons that go way beyond our bodies and how empowering it is to feel strong and to lift weights. And so I think that more people are having the realization that, oh, like fitness could be for other reasons than just to be skinny. And there's lots of benefits for movement. And also I can move because it's fun and it's empowering and it's really cool.
Do you know that t-shirt that says strong is the new skinny?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
What do you think about that?
So here's the thing. I totally understand the mindset behind that. But to be honest, I'm not really a fan of the phrase strong is the new anything, because again, I think we start talking about bodies, right? Like it's not to like, I don't think the origin of that phrase is to like shame people that are in thinner bodies or smaller bodies, but some people are literally naturally in smaller bodies, right? And so my thing about it is like, strong doesn't have to be the new anything, right? Like you can be strong, you can be skinny, you can be in a larger body, you could not be strong, like all the things are cool. So strong is just cool, strong is fun, strong is whatever. I don't like the idea of replacing it to say it's the new something else. Although I understand the mindset behind it though.
You know, as you speak about that, actually, what comes to mind? Do you remember there was this discussion around real women, right, and the size of real women, and it's like, well, that's
for women, right?
Right. It's just shifting the conversation because before I said, okay, so if most women are not size 0, whatever you see on the covers, real women are size 8 or 18 or 28. It's like, but
everybody's a real woman, right?
Right.
Like your
Right.
body doesn't
So
make that if you're a real woman or not. So the same thing, I think the idea is to be like more inclusive, but like it's not really more inclusive when you start saying like this is the real woman. So like the person that's outside of that that whatever frame we're talking about, does that make them not a real woman? Of course not. So yeah,
and that's an interesting movement, right? Because I think you're pointing out the intent is great, because
right.
you have this group that has been ignored or invisible for a long period of time. So how do we make this group more visible without necessarily making all the others invisible, right? Like it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. Like how do we actually lift everyone up?
We all be in the space, right? And like, and
Right.
that's the point, that we're all here, not that like there's like these hierarchies. And sometimes I think that the thought process, like the pendulum is like so swung in one direction, we have to bring it back. But I don't like think the way to bring it back is to like somehow like exclude or like be condescending of another type of group. Like I just think let's just all empower and lift up everyone. That's what really we need to do.
So I want to know that kind of back to the skinny thing. Do you remember, like now that you think back, it's been a number of years ago now, right? That you've had your that first session. What was it about being skinny that was appealing?
Yeah, absolutely. So like, you know, a lot of y'all don't know this. I'm also really tall. I'm 5'11". And so I've also been really tall since like when I was third grade, I was like 5'8". So I've always just been like bigger than everyone around me. And so the thing about being skinny was that I felt like I already took up a lot of space in my body because I was a big person. And I felt like I couldn't be a tall person and be in a larger body. So I'm like, if I'm tall already, I need to be skinny. And I remember this thing I used to say, and I'm like, I'm going to tell y'all, but it's a horrible thing. But this is literally what I used to think. I was like, if I'm tall and skinny, I look like a model. If I'm large and skinny, I mean, if I'm tall and skinny, I look like a model. If I'm like in a larger body and tall, I look like a linebacker. And I used to tell people that, like, that was my thought process. So for me, what was appealing about it is I was like, well, if I can't, you know, like I felt, I never disliked being tall. Like it's never been a problem, but I was just always aware of the fact that I was like showing up bigger than other people. So I was like, well, I don't want to be bigger all around. So I'll just be like skinny and tall and I'll be like a model. That'll be cool.
And that's not, it's interesting because I think we all do that. Like there's this very conditional thing, because if I'm going to be tall, which I can't really control,
You can
then
change that.
like, at least I can be skinny, right? Like I'm going to focus on this other thing, which I can sort of maybe control. Right. Yeah. And I think I see that with some women who identify as petite and curvaceous, right? Like they're like, I'm going to be the hourglass figure. Like there's this, I can't control my height then.
And I can do this. And it's really interesting, right? Because I think that was, and again, for me also, it goes deeper than that even, because I have like also have a history of being a perfectionist. And so I think back to like high school when I like really first started dieting, and then like into my adult life when a lot of things in my life felt out of control around me that I couldn't do anything about. It was like, when it comes to weight loss though, that's something I do feel like I can have control over. And I think a lot of people, like, I don't think people always notice that, but it's like, if I'm in a situation and life feels overwhelming, or I feel like I'm losing control in other areas, I'm like, but this is one thing I know I can control. So I'm going to focus on this thing.
Yeah. So Krista Scott Dixon, she's the director of curriculum at Precision Nutrition. And the one question that I love that she often asks when folks talk about this all of a sudden needing to lose weight, like there's this, all of a sudden he's like, I just really feel like I should lose 5 pounds. Yeah. So, and I've stolen that question from her many times. And the question is, what else is going on for you right now?
Right. That's it. Right. Yes. I mean, I've never like, but that's exactly what it is, because for me, it's like, that's like the low when, and especially like when there's other things going on that are maybe heavier and deeper that you're not really ready to explore yet, then the weight loss is like, oh yeah, you know what, I'm going to do that. That's the thing. And I totally agree that so often, especially when it's an all of a sudden thing, it's coming from a place of something else that's going on.
Yeah. And I'm remembering like I've been in the health and wellness space for a number of years, and I thought I did the work, but I still remember as I was getting ready to get married, the pressure to get a little bit smaller was strong, right? I just, this like little voice in the back of my mind is like, maybe I should just, it's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. What is going on right now? Is this really what I need right now? Right? Like, let's add some stress
to what, yeah. And I think it's really interesting you bring this up though, because I think for all of us, right, no matter like how long we've been doing this work, so many of our ideas about bodies and about weight is so deeply conditioned, right? We've been getting these messages from the time we were really young. We live in a culture that very much emphasizes people's bodies, particularly for women, right? The emphasis is always on women's looks, their bodies. When we look at like media, it's just so often the conversation shifts from like what women are doing to what they look like while they're doing it. And so I think for all of us, no matter how long we've been doing that work, it's like those thoughts still pop up. And I think that's one thing that's so important to acknowledge, that people, because I think sometimes people think, oh, like some people have like figured it out and they don't have those thoughts anymore. And it's like, no, those things are always there, right? It's taking the time to examine those thoughts with curiosity, like you did, like, wait a minute, what else is really going on here? And I think the more we do the work, the quicker we can reframe those things. But I don't think it ever just goes away and we never have thoughts about our bodies anymore.
Yeah, and I think the one example I gave recently was just how diet culture can manifest itself sometimes, even like in people who have been doing the work. So a couple of years ago, I was pregnant, and during the first trimester, I actually was so nauseous that I lost, I think, 5 or 6 pounds. And I remember stepping on a scale, and Chrissy, my first instinct when I saw the number was, oh, yay. And then it just kind of went, wow. I mean, right?
Yeah.
There is that kind of like the first reaction is still very much embedded in lighter is better and less is better. And like, ooh, look, right?
Yeah, it's so hard to learn those things though, because they're so deeply rooted in like our thought process. And like, I've had lots of moments like that over the years, but like I weighed myself first, because I don't typically weigh myself, but like if I was at the doctor's office or something and I was like, oh, that's lighter than I expected. And I'm like, why am I, what is like, where is that coming from? Why am I like happy that it's lighter? What does that even mean? And so also so interesting that a time like during pregnancy, right? You're like, when you know that your body's going to change, and then your initial reaction is like, oh, I lost weight. And you're like, wait a minute, but I lost weight because I'm nauseous and I can't eat, right? Like it's not like a great thing that that I've lost weight. But and that's
the one thing with women, you probably notice that a lot with clients. Like you said something really cool. You said, during pregnancy, we know that the body is going to change, right? But at the same time, we kind of know that the body is going to change regardless.
Always. Yeah. I mean, that's exactly it. That's the thing. Like our bodies are always going to be changing, right? And that's like this idea too. Like they're designed to change. Like that is just that's humanity, right? We come out of the womb as a baby. Our body is forever changing. There's never a period where our body's it's going to be the same. And I think that's also this idea about, when clients are like, I want to get to this goal weight. And I'm like, okay, when does that go away? Just out of curiosity, like, when I was like a senior in high school. And it's like, you're a grown woman now, right? Like, and I did that, but I get that because I did that for a long time when I was in my 20s and I was like dieting and like really into, hardcore dieting and fat loss and like really obsessive about it. I had these 2 pair of jeans that remember in my senior year in high school, and those were like my barometer. I kept those jeans like, oh, I can still fit into them. And then when it was like, ma'am, you were 18, you're 28 now. Why are you still trying to wear jeans from when you were 18? That was not like the peak moment that your body's supposed to stay that way forever now. And I think we just forget or don't think about the fact that our bodies are allowed to change. They're designed to change. They're supposed to change, right? And they're going to be changing forever.
So you identify as a body positive trainer. Can you tell us, what do you mean by that? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, so it's really funny because I've actually lately been, I do consider myself a body positive trainer, but I've actually been struggling with that word a lot for a lot of reasons, but I'll explain what I think about when I describe myself as that. And I'm actually, to be honest, I really say that I'm a body liberation trainer now, which is different, and I'll get into that. But when I think about body positivity or a body positive trainer, for me, that just means that my goal when people come to me is not like, let's lose 20 pounds. My goal is, let's help you feel energized and nourished and healthy and whole in your body, and recognize that all bodies are going to look different. For one, there's no right way to have a body. There's no right way to look or a wrong way to look in terms of like being fit or being healthy. And then also just recognize that bodies do come in all different shapes and sizes. Some bodies are naturally thinner than other bodies. And if you're making your barometer on if you're healthy or if you've achieved your fitness goals, if you're like picturing your mind as some person that you've seen on the internet and you're like, that's the body I need to have, like, you know, like you may never have that body. It doesn't mean that you're not healthy. And so, you know, I think for body positivity, the reason I feel like I'm struggling with that word, because the actual body positive movement was created for women that were in larger bodies, that were in Black bodies, that were in queer bodies and trans bodies, differently able bodies. So really for the people that are on the margins, right, that may not in this society have the capacity to love and accept their bodies as much as, you know, people that are like fall within more of like, you know, Western Eurocentric standards of beauty may do. And so it was never about just like, oh, we should love our bodies. It's like, yeah, I look different than a lot of other people look, and I still can create the space to love and accept my body for what it is. And so a lot of times now the body positivity, in my opinion anyways, the body positivity movement is like hyper focused on like people taking pictures in like swimsuits with like a little bit of body fat and being like, I still love myself, right? Yeah, yes, that, right? And I'm like, oh, that's not what this is about. And on top of that, it's like really erasing the people for whom the movement was actually created for. So I don't necessarily identify with that as much anymore. However, I think the thing that is really great about body positivity is that I do, although it's been co-opted and changed and all these things, I think it is a really good entry point into people to start thinking about bodies differently. And for me, it's like when people come to me and they're like, I hate everything about myself. I know like sometimes the messaging with body positivity is like, just love yourself. And I think that's really bad advice actually, because if it was that simple, everybody would just love themselves and be done. So it's like, how can we move from like hating ourselves more into like body neutrality, where you look in the mirror and you say, I don't like what I see. However, even though I don't like what I see yet, I can treat myself with kindness and compassion that I would show my best friend or my partner or my child. I can speak nicely to myself and not be demeaning to the person that I see in the mirror. And how can we move to a space of neutrality? And then long term, right? The long term goal is how can we get to a space of liberation in which not only do we feel comfortable and confident in our bodies, but more importantly, we recognize that our bodies are just the vessel that allows us to have this human experience. It has no connection to our worthiness as a person.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for elaborating on that. And it really sounds like when you talk about this idea of body neutrality, it really just sounds like a more perhaps achievable goal at first for
Yes.
most of us, because it just feels like if we're going from, ugh, I'm disgusting, right, which is something that I know I have said and I have heard from clients, right? And I know a lot of coaches are, so I see coaches ask that question where they're almost taken aback by the sheer power of loathing that comes out of their clients' mouths when they talk about their bodies, right? It's like, oh, it's disgusting. I look in the mirror and I just can't stand it, right? You have all kinds of animal comparisons come in, right? Like anything from pigs to whales.
Yeah.
So to kind of go from there to embrace your feminine goddess energy seems like a little bit of a
jump.
Far reach. Like, how do we get there, right? So what are some, like, do you have any tips? Like, if I'm a woman or a man who looks in the mirror and says, oh, that's disgusting. How do I make that tiny step towards body neutrality?
Yeah, so absolutely. I just want to say one thing first before that. I think it's so important what you just said is I think that's why people get discouraged, right? Because they're like, there's no way I can get from hating everything I see to being like, I love this. This is so great. It's not possible. It's not feasible. And it's just not good advice in my opinion. But I think like, how do you take these little baby steps is, for one thing, I'm a really big fan of like, when you have that initial thought. So let's pretend you look in the mirror and you just say like, I look so disgusting, right? Because I've said that to myself many times. I always say like, those are moments where we need to like pause, right? And pause and ask ourselves, again, I always say with curiosity, what about me looks disgusting? And really dig into what it is. And then if you say like, like specifically the rolls on my stomach are just really, really gross. Okay, what makes your stomach, what makes that gross, right? And to really start to think about, because we say these things and we don't really stop to think about, where is this thought coming from? Why do I think it's gross? What is the standard that I'm measuring this against? And I think the other really important thing about curiosity is that it's not from a place of judgment or shame. There's no right or wrong answers. It's just that we're taking the time to really think through it. And I think, you know, when we start to really dig into what it is that we're feeling about ourselves and to take the time to really sit with our feelings. I mean, I'm really kind of like actually journaling about this. When we really start to take the time and sit with our feelings, I think underlying a lot of these things for a lot of us is not, these aren't our own personal beliefs. These are things that we have been taught. These are things that we see societally. Like, where is this idea actually coming from? Like, and also not just that, where is it coming from, but like, what would it mean if I woke up tomorrow and I didn't have this roll in my stomach? What would change about my life? Would I be a better person? Would I be a happier person? If I would be a happy person, what do I think is actually going to be happier about me? And really start to question those things. Because when we don't really stop to think about this along the way, what happened for me and what I've seen happen for a lot of people is I reached my quote unquote goal weight, and I wasn't any happier than I was before. And in fact, I was more obsessive about my body, and it was never enough. And I was like, okay, I reached my goal weight, but I just need to lose 5 more pounds now, right? And it was a point for me, I was like, wait a minute, I could be doing this for the rest of my life. I really need to stop and think about what is really going on here, because it's really not about the number on the scale, because even though I got that number, I'm still in the same position.
Yeah, I remember talking to a fellow coach, and she's been in her late 50s at a time. And she said, Kate, you know what I realized recently? She said, I've been trying to lose 5 pounds my entire life. And regardless, and she's a woman who lives in a straight size body, right? So it's never been, and it's not 50 pounds, it's not 150 pounds, it's 5, right? Like sometimes it's 4, sometimes it's 7, like it gets very specific. But she said, I've been trying to lose 5 pounds for most of my life, regardless of how much she weighed. So she would go up, down, and it was always that like number. So it's a moving target, which in itself, like this is the part that I often point out to clients as we work together, where whenever you have a moving target, we have to pause and say, whoa, this is a losing game. Like, we will never get there. So what is the point, right?
Yeah. And I mean, even for me, I remember I was like, and this is the thing that, you know, is so important to recognize too, is like when we start to like pause and really question like what it is that we're really trying to achieve, or why do I think this is gross, or what do I think is going to be so much better if I lose those last 5 pounds, is because when I was like the leanest I'd ever been as an adult, and I'm talking about to the fact that like people were constantly like commenting positively about my body, like, you know, everywhere I went, I still was really unhappy. And so it wasn't even about other people at this point. This was just about me. And so that's why I think it's so also important that we work on a relationship. You know, we talk about body positivity and body image. Body image is our relationship with our own bodies, our own perception. And that has nothing to do with what other people think, because people could think you look wonderful and you could be like, you can still look in the mirror, right? You could be in a very small, lean body, whatever that means, right? And still look in the mirror and be like, I hate what I see, and have a negative relationship with your body. And everybody could be like, wow, you look so great. So when we start having these conversations, it's so important to really sit with where, because I really think it comes down to is like, where do we think our value and worth as a person is coming from? Is it coming from our external, or is it coming from who we are as people? And 2 things I always remind myself of is, number 1, when I die, no one's gonna like remember that summer in 2019 when I had like the best body of my life. And if they do, wow, I've really failed as a person, because I don't want I want people to remember the times we had, the memories, the experiences we had together. No one's gonna think about that the summer I had like 6-pack abs, which I haven't ever had, by the way. But if I did, no one's gonna be thinking about that. So that's one thing. And the second thing I always tell myself all the time is the way I look is the least interesting thing about me. Because again, that's not what I bring to the table. It's not the way I look. And I think that's such an important message for all of us to internalize. And the more that we can disconnect with associating our value to the way we look, the more comfortable and confident we can be in who we are.
So then I have a question, because we talk about the body positivity, body liberation, body neutrality, and generally the weight and physical appearance being fairly uninteresting as it comes to the person and the person's worth. Now, can someone be a body positive trainer, body neutral coach, and coach intentional weight loss, or intentional weight gain, or intentional change of body shape and size?
That's a good question. So I think the answer is yes, but I think it's very, very nuanced. I think it's very, very nuanced. So me personally, I don't coach people on intentional fat loss or weight loss personally, because it's a very nuanced topic. Because yes, you can help people with intentional fat loss and simultaneously, I think, be working on a relationship with body image. But I also really, again, the reason that I am not a fan of intentional fat loss or weight loss coaching is because, again, you're basing it on this number that when you get to this number, that means that you have better health. And that might not be true, right? I think of when I got to a specific number, I had a negative relationship with food. I had a negative relationship with exercise. I had a much negative relationship with my body image. So when I look at health is not just about food and nutrition, it's about overall health. And when I look at my intentional weight loss journey, the number on the scale was much lower. My body looked very different, but overall I was not in a good place in terms of my mental health around none of the, like I couldn't even go places without being like tracking every single thing I ate. It was a very obsessive habits for me. So I'm like, well, I wasn't really healthier. I was in a smaller body, sure. So, when we take the focus off of that and focus on like, how do I want to feel? What are and like, if you think like I want to work out because let's just say it's like based on a health condition. Like a person says, I have high blood pressure, so I want to work on that. Cool. Let's work on some outcomes that can help you do that. But the number on the scale doesn't have to be the metric of success. So if we're talking about like, I want to feel better, I want to have more energy, I want to be able to run around with my kids, I want to be able to jog a mile and not feel out of breath. Cool. Those are things that we can work on. If fat loss comes as a result of changing behaviors, awesome. If it doesn't, did we still reach your goal? Did you accomplish those things, even if your body doesn't look different?
What about the goals that are numeric, but not weight specific? And I'll give you an example. So like, I know for me, I'm a runner. So I tend to feel lighter on my feet when I'm lighter, right? Like that makes sense. I just have less. Yeah. So I may drop some weight in the racing season because I'm faster. And then my body kind of changes in the winter as I get a little bit of fat on, and then that kind of repeats itself in the spring, right? Like you, as somebody who loves and used to compete in powerlifting, again, weight.
I get that, yes.
Right? So what would you say, like if there are some numeric goals, or I'm also thinking of even sports that are number specific, like weight classes.
Yeah, I mean, I competed in powerlifting, right? And it was a weight class specific. So every time I was getting ready to compete, I usually did have like 5 pounds that I had to drop. And I don't think like, for me, that wasn't like a personally triggering time. I think we also, but the one thing I would say, like specifically in the powerlifting community, is like, I think it's also important to recognize how much our ideas about bodies could be tied to a particular weight class. So for example, right? Like maybe I could move up to a higher weight class where I could train more fueled and still move my body really well and feel comfortable. But because I like being at the smaller body weight, I'm going to really maybe struggle with constantly dieting to try to keep my body smaller because I want to be at this lower weight class. That's something that I didn't ever really struggle with that, but a lot of people in powerlifting did. So I think it's always, again, this recognition that when it comes to weight classes in sports, that's a real thing. And I don't think that, and especially like people who are runners or people like that makes sense, right? Like, and also I think in the summertime, at least, from the Midwest, so it's cold in the winter, we're inside, we're sedentary, right? Like in the wintertime, in the summertime, you're out, you're doing more. Like having a little body fat difference between seasons also makes sense, especially if you're an athletic person. So I guess what I will say is like, I don't think that's a bad thing at all. However, I'm always going back to the fact that we should still always be examining, am I losing this weight because this is the weight class for me, or am I doing this because also secretly I want to make sure I'm staying in a smaller body? So I think always just going back to that, taking the time to pause and question the thoughts that come up with curiosity and kindness and compassion and honesty, recognize there's no right or wrong answer. We're just learning more about ourselves.
And I think that is so fascinating because I think sometimes this intent to lose weight can often be veiled by like wellness or performance.
Always.
Like I just need to get to the lower weight class.
Yes.
Or I'm just cutting out X food group because I feel better eating that way. Not that you couldn't truly be feeling better eating that way, but it is that conversation to explore. It's like, that's cool. For reals though?
Yes, that's exactly it. Because it could be true, but I think the thing about health and wellness is that like health and wellness is you could be behaving in some pretty disordered eating habits under the name of health. And people are like, oh yeah, I get it. You just want to be healthy, right? I've done this before. I've done things. I'm like, oh, I just do it because my health is really important to me. It was for a much different reason if I was being honest with myself. And so I think you're right in that, like, it could be true, and also question and open to the possibility, or at least examine, is it about that and something else as well? Because those things, it could be both as well.
For sure. So who do you work with now? Like, I know we had somebody ask, how did you find your niche? Like, how did you come up with your niche, and who would you work with?
Yeah, so it's funny because I think I just, so I got into my journey as a person who wanted to really lose weight. And then I became a trainer and a coach after I'd been powerlifting for a while. And I was very much in the same place when I started coaching, in terms of I was like coaching people on fat loss. Like I did all those things. And then as my own personal journey with body image evolved, slowly my messaging and coaching started evolving, right? So it's just kind of grown with me along the way, because as I've had more realizations about myself, if I've healed my own relationship with body image, I'm just like, oh, I get it. This makes sense for me personally, and this is the way I'm going to coach. And so it really has honestly just evolved because of my own life experiences. And so now, to be honest, like I'm doing so much work. I'm also like, I'm a freelance writer, so I write about a lot of these things. But I also do a lot of work around diversity, inclusion, anti-racism work within wellness. So I'm doing a lot of that more now of that. So my client roster is like, getting lower and lower, but primarily I have always worked with women or people who identify as women, mostly I'd say in their 20s, 25 to like 45 age range. And literally all my clients now that come to me are because they want to, address their relationship with health and wellness in a way that, number one, maybe resolve some of their issues with body image or struggles that they've had with food and exercise and an unhealthy relationship. Or people who are like, listen, I just want to feel strong. I want to feel good. I don't want to have to feel, I don't want to work with a coach who's going to pressure me about fat loss, or that has to be a metric. I don't want to have to like take before and after pictures. I just want to feel good and work out. And so because of like the way I talk about all these things, like that's just literally who I attract now.
They self-select in a way,
right?
right?
Yeah, they just self-select for the most part. Very like, when I was kind of making that transition, I'd get a lot of people still who were like, I want to do fat loss. And it's like, I don't really teach intentional fat loss, but there's a myriad of other coaches that I can introduce you to, because I don't think it's a bad thing necessarily. It's just not what I do. So I refer people away. But now I'm at the point that no one comes to me for that anymore anyway. So.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I think a lot of folks end up doing kind of what you did, selecting the clients that you work with, where if you are stumped on your niche, the most obvious place to start is you coach people like you, kind of, right? And then it evolves from there, where you start with coaching women like 20 to 40, or, men 18 to 35, like whoever you happen to be. And I think that is especially the case for folks who have like their own coming of age story, right? Or their own transformation, or their own health wake-up call, or whatever that might be. So I wanted to actually shift gears a little bit, and I wanted to ask you, because I know you wrote about this a little bit in terms of making the health and fitness spaces more inclusive. And in this group, we have a lot of folks that are personal trainers, but also gym owners who have a facility of some sort. And now things are ever so slowly starting to reopen, depending on where we are. So what are some examples in which health and fitness spaces could be exclusive? Like in what ways are spaces not inclusive?
So many. How much time do we have? Okay, so this is a big topic, but I think when we talk about inclusive spaces, I think the thing. Okay, I'm going to give you I feel like I have to break this down just a little bit. So now you hear a lot about like diversity and inclusion. Like those are big words that people use a lot, but there's a real difference between diversity and inclusion. And I have to start with this first. So diversity is like, do I have a lot of people from all different backgrounds represented in this space? So race, gender identity, sexual orientation, like all, gender, body size, like all these things are areas of diversity, right? So do I have that represented in my space? That's diversity. Inclusion is, can all people from those backgrounds come into the space and feel celebrated, welcome, respected, seen? Do they come into the space and feel like this programming, the space was created with them in mind? Or does it feel like they're an afterthought that can just hopefully assimilate into this space? So they're very different things. Verna Myers, diversity inclusion specialist, she has this really great quote and says, diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. And so we can all resonate with the idea of being at a party and you're like kind of like a wallflower and you're watching everybody else have a good time. It doesn't really feel that great. You feel awkward. You're like, I'm here, but I'm not really feeling like I'm a part of this. Inclusion, being asked to dance, is when someone grabs you and you're like, hey, let's have a really good time. And now you're in the party having the time of your life. That's the difference. And so I think what happens a lot of times in fitness and wellness spaces is that, sure, there's people from different backgrounds here sometimes, because sometimes there's not even. Like as a Black person, I can tell you I've gone to a lot of spaces where I've been the only person or one of the only people. So there wasn't even diversity. But then also I've gone into a lot of spaces that you can tell, you know, it was organized without a diverse perspective present, and it shows in the way that the events are running. So a couple of examples. Number one, especially in the fitness and wellness industry, I go to a lot of conferences and like the speaker lineup is predominantly white males, right? You're not seeing a lot of representation from women and definitely not a lot of people of color. And you're going into professional settings like that where you don't see people like yourself represented is a problem. And then like in gym spaces, you know, I think of this all the time. You know, Brooklyn is a much more, it's a very diverse part of the country. So, you know, the gym I go to in Brooklyn, which is not open right now, but like we have gender neutral bathrooms, we have gender neutral changing stations, so that people from trans identity, queer identity, whatever you identify as, you can come into the space. You'll have a place that you can go to the bathroom. You'll have a place that you can change clothes. That's something that gets overlooked a lot. And I think if you're not living in a trans body, like I'm not, that might be like something you don't even think about, because that's not a problem for you. You never have to go. I don't never have to go to a place and be like, am I going to have somewhere I can go to the bathroom? Am I going to have somewhere I can change clothes? Am I going to have somewhere I'll feel safe to do those things? That gets forgotten about, right? Like a lot of times you don't think about those things. So when it comes to inclusivity, there's just, I think the wellness industry, fitness and wellness industry overall, just missing a mark in a lot of areas, ranging from, you know, simple stuff like not having representation of different backgrounds to literally having spaces that we are not considering people who are differently abled. We are not considering people with different gender identities. We're just like not even thinking about those things at all.
Yeah, and I think it's also a good example, like you said, you're not living in a trans body, and neither am I, right? And I think sometimes, like, to even connect the dots for folks a little bit, like, because I think it goes further, where the phrase that comes to mind right now, anybody can come here and anybody can use this space. And the one example that comes to mind, so I have a 20-month-old, so she's going to turn 2 in a couple of months. But the one thing that I had no idea before I had a kid was that a lot of men's bathrooms don't have a changing table.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which to me is mind-blowing, right? Because like, if
I don't change diapers, what?
Yeah, like if we're out in a restaurant and I want to do like this, right? They can't do this. Like that to me was very interesting. And like, even as you speak, like right now, what I'm thinking of, like if I take my daughter to the bathroom, or my husband takes her to the bathroom, he's gonna take her to a men's bathroom.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, but I mean, when she's 5, is he still good, right? Like that, it feels like it's confusing, where something like a gender neutral bathroom where anybody can use this space.
Yeah, it's a communal, anybody can use the space, right? Yeah, and I think, you know, especially when it comes to gender, you know, gender, we're just in such a binary, right? Men or women, like, you know, so I start thinking about people who are gender non-conforming or non-binary, and it's just, it doesn't lend a lot of space for people varying backgrounds, and also just like we're so conditioned around when we think about gender. So I know, here's a good example of me, like even having done a lot of this work when I first moved to New York, again, much more progressive. I'm from the Midwest, I'm from Wisconsin. So I've been in Brooklyn only for not even a year yet. And so we're much more progressive in Brooklyn than we are in other places. But I remember the first time I went to like I don't know, it was like a hotel bathroom or something. And like, it wasn't just gender neutral stalls, it was literally a gender neutral bathroom. And I was like, wow, this is different. And then I like had I used the bathroom. It was a fine experience. And I was like, okay, this was fine. This wasn't a big deal. But it's just like, we're so programmed to think of like how things should be. And so to start to change some of those things and just really walk into these spaces and really think, again, because we all have privilege, no matter who we are on this call, everybody, myself included, we all have privilege. Like, right, me not living in a trans body, I have the privilege of not having to think about things like that. So no matter what your identity is, we all have privilege. And to really walk into spaces and start to think, if I was in a different identity, if I had a different set of circumstances and I walked into this space, what it would feel like, and to really start to think outside of yourself when you're designing events or when you have physical locations or you're doing any type of work. Think outside of your own experience and start to think, how would I feel if I came to the space differently abled or in a different gender or race or ethnicity? And what would that feel like here?
What are some of the specific things that gym owners could do to make the spaces then more inclusive? Like, I'm thinking of an example. It's funny how motherhood keeps coming up, but like for me, like dragging around the stroller in the mall of all places back when, you know, malls were open. But that was so fascinating because, Chrissy, I realized that, again, speaking of privilege, like someone who's, you know, young and healthy and fit, and like I wouldn't even know where elevators were.
Yep.
In any of the spaces, because it just never came. Like I would always use the stairs. Using stairs with a stroller is not a thing. So all of a sudden I'm doing these like long loops. And that was the one thing that kind of made me very aware. It's like, well, guess what? If I was in a wheelchair, this is the experience. So what are some things that like gym owners and personal trainers could do to make those spaces more inclusive?
So I always like to backtrack before we get to inclusion, I think on an individual level, because again, we all have this privilege. We all are coming to the table with bias. I really think it's really important for like any wellness practitioner, no matter what your background is, that we all be doing the work of anti-racism in our own lives and also like examining our own biases, because we all have bias, right? And so the book that I recommend for everyone all the time is a book called Me and White Supremacy by Layla Saad. It's not just a book, it's like a workbook and a journal. I highly recommend everybody get that. It's going to challenge you, promise you it's going to challenge you, but it's such a great book to start thinking about the ways. I mean, we start having conversations about racism. I think, you know, sometimes those they're always uncomfortable, but I think a lot of times people think of racism in like, you know, the KKK and like lynching, right? And that is, yes, that's racism, but also racism is a spectrum. It also shows up in other ways and much subtler ways that are into the form of like microaggressions, where you're saying things like, oh, I don't see color here, everybody's welcome, right? So there's a spectrum of racism. So I think it's really important that individually as practitioners, people really take the time to dig into your own stuff, because we all have stuff to examine there. And I think that's such an important piece, because when you first start with yourself, then you're like, okay, I can recognize the way this is showing up in myself. I can recognize the ways this could be showing up with my staff. And because I want to be a space that's welcoming for everyone, we have to address ourselves individually first. So I think that's like the first advice that I give to everybody, is to look within first. And then when it starts to talking about inclusion, again, I think the basic things that I'm thinking about off the top of my head is like how we're, you know, even simple things like someone walks into your gym to sign up and they're going to do like, you know, if you have an intake form, right? Are you having those labels be a way that is inclusive to everyone, right? Do you have to say that you're a male or a female, or is it a blank space so you can put however you want to identify? If it's not a blank space, do you have all the options there for people to just select in a way that feels good for them? Are you asking people as a matter of practice, what are your pronouns? That's just like a question that we can all not only just ask, but also normalize, that we're just saying, oh, my name is Chrissy and my pronouns are she, her. So that it's not an awkward thing. It's just a thing that we all do. It's normal. And so normalizing things like that. Obviously thinking about things like music choices in the gym. You know, I love listening to rap music as much as anybody else, but like, are you using music that's censored so that you don't run into situations of language where people are saying like the N-word because it's rapping, right? Like things that you should be thinking about, because if those things happen and those things come up, then you should be able to, you need to be able to address them to make sure that people feel safe. Really good recommendation that I have for people who run a gym space or wellness space is, do you have like an actual anti-racism and diversity inclusion policy? And are you creating a culture in which people that come into your space, these are the values and the mission of this business. This is the conduct that we expect everyone to, you know, to behave at this level. These are things we don't accept. These are things we do accept. If you don't follow the code of conduct or our community rules, like this is how it's going to be handled. Like thinking about things like that and really creating a culture in which it's not just like, yeah, everyone's welcome, but also this culture in the space, everyone that comes into the space knows that everyone is welcome here and that we expect you to behave accordingly. So I could go on for hours about this stuff. Like I actually have a 2-hour webinar about diversity and inclusion because there's just so many things to cover, but those are the things off the bat that I'm like, yeah, I've got to be mindful of this. But then also like, going into other stuff around like diet culture and how is the space also being mindful of how we are talking to people about bodies. There's a lot of things. And obviously I already mentioned like gender neutral facilities, but just really creating the culture and the environment that goes beyond just saying we're a space for everyone, but really being a space that feels safe for everyone.
Yeah, and I think that the 2 points, and I'm mindful of your time, that the 2 points that really stood out to me as you were speaking, like that first starting with yourself, right? And I mean, I feel that as a white woman who grew up not in North America, but in an all white town in Russia. I think the very first time I've ever met a Black person, I was probably in my teens, right? And also recognizing like that, what you talked about, acknowledging, right? Because I think just acknowledging that we are biased in any way is incredibly uncomfortable. And I think I distinctly remember a moment I was sitting in a bus terminal, and I must have been 20 years old, and there were a Black person came in. I can't even remember if it was how many, like I don't remember the details of it, but I grabbed my purse,
right,
and I put it in my lap, and I remember thinking like, what just happened? Like it was that, right? It was almost like that pregnancy example where like I saw the number on the scale and my first instinct was like, ooh, this is great, I lost. And it was kind of the same. It was before I could do anything, like my hands just went, and just, so even catching ourselves in that, I think is really the start, because how else are we going to go there? And the other thing about just inclusive spaces and how we approach it, what really stands out to me is it's everything. It's all the things we don't have to think about. Like that's really, to me, that kind of what privilege is, right? As we're trying to get,
worry about.
It's even like I'm an omnivore. I eat anything. I will eat everything. But inviting 30 people to my house, I want to ask if there are dietary restrictions, if there are allergies, right? Like I don't want to have shrimp in my house if somebody has a shellfish allergy. I remember, you'll appreciate this, at a yoga studio I've been practicing years ago, the intake form for new clients, whether somebody was pregnant or not was included under injuries.
Oh, injury. Okay. Injury, pregnancy.
That's just like, I remember it was just one of those things, right? It was like, wait, what? Like,
that's an injury.
And it seems small, but it's also insidious, right? That
exactly it.
Like, ooh, like you're pregnant. Like, not that anyone is saying you're pregnant and you're injured, but words matter, right?
Words
and I think
matter so much.
How it kind of comes through.
All of your stories, like I could go on about this stuff forever, but I just want to say 2 really quick things. Is number 1, the language piece is really, really important. Like words really do matter. And I think, we have like in American culture, we have like a history of using words that have really painful historical context for some people, and then using them because we like use them as slang. And so I just think words really matter a lot. And so just like words like tribe and spirit animal and things like that are very prevalent in fitness spaces. Those are words we should stay away from, right? Because, there's like whole articles written by Indigenous people about how they don't appreciate, non-Indigenous people using those words, especially in the ways that we use them. But language, and it might seem like a small thing to some people, but language really, really does matter. And the second thing I want to say on the story you told about grabbing your purse before even realizing, that's exactly what it is. It's like when those things happen, having the taking the time to be like, oh, wait a minute, what did I just do? What is this bias about? Where is this coming from? Am I carrying a stereotype that I've learned along the way that I don't actually believe to be true? And really like sitting with those things instead of just throwing them away really quick, taking the time to stop and be like, oh, where is this bias coming from? And how am I going to work to address this?
And once again, it's the pause, right?
It's the pause, yeah.
It's the question, what just happened? What was that? Yeah, I think that's a great point at which to wrap up. Where can folks learn more about you?
Absolutely. So I am most active on Instagram, and on Instagram it's I am Chrissy King, and then my website is just chrissyking.com.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you
Thank
for
you. This is such a great conversation. Like, honestly, I literally could talk for I can't stay for 2 hours, but I could talk to you for 2 hours. It's been a really great conversation.
Thank you so much.